Tonight, all backed up.
Workers here at the port are now working around the clock.
The supply chain emergency leading to empty shelves and high prices. Plus, tax backlash.
To reject this plan.
The outcry over a plan to allow the IRS to access bank data for accounts with transactions over $600. And the Israeli delegation, the foreign minister's visit with America's top leaders. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
A shortage in the supply chain could spell higher prices ahead of the holidays. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
Good evening. I'm John Jessup. The broken link the United States faces in the supply chain, causing a ripple effect throughout the economy, including Americans' wallets.
The White House tonight trying to help alleviate some of the tension, but the strain of higher prices and shipping delays could go on for months. A senior Washington correspondent Tara Merchner has tonight's top story. Tara, this is a big deal for a lot of families.
Sure is, John and Jenna. That's right. And the White House and businesses literally from coast to coast are warning the supply headaches will get even worse as the holidays approach and demand is higher. And this year, prices will no doubt be higher, too.
To help get things moving again, the president says he's brokered an agreement for the Port of Los Angeles to become a 24-hour, 7 days a week operation.
You're hearing a lot about something called supply chains, and how hard it is to get a range of things from a toaster to sneakers to bicycles.
Big retailers and shipping companies are also pledging to expand their hours. President Biden meeting with Walmart, UPS, and Home Depot.
This is the first key step toward moving our entire freight, transportation, and logistical supply chain nationwide to a 24/7 system.
LA and Long Beach ports account for 40% of shipping containers that enter the U.S., both suffering from record-breaking backlogs.
What happens with the railroads in the Midwest and warehouses across the country affects the number of ships that everyone sees out here in the harbor.
High consumer demand, plus a shortage of truck drivers.
We're about 3 hours late.
Factory workers and other supply chain issues are also keeping many items off store shelves, with shortages expected to continue through the holidays.
To keep your shelves full, we have to order 8 weeks in advance, 8 to 6 weeks.
Basically, what I've been telling people to do is start shopping early, even before Halloween.
But the Treasury Secretary is telling Americans not to panic.
I think there's no reason for consumers to panic about the absence of goods that they're going to want to acquire at Christmas.
The White House has launched a task force to examine these supply chain issues. Economists also warn delays and higher prices may also stifle consumer spending in an already fragile economic recovery.
And the latest inflation reading shows it edged up to 5.4% last month, with the biggest increases in food, shelter, and gas. Now, according to a recent bank rate survey, 89% of Americans now say they have noticed these rising prices at the cash register. 66%, John and Jenna, say they are hurting financially because of them. It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. All right, Tara Merchner, thank you. Meanwhile, the Biden administration wants to give the IRS financial data for millions of Americans and businesses. Under the plan, banks would have to report any customer transactions over $600. Supporters say it would help pay for Biden's high-dollar domestic agenda by cracking down on wealthy tax cheats. Critics say it's an invasion of privacy. Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson has this story. Abby?
Well, Jenna, Republicans call this proposal bizarre and claim that it will flag all kinds of ordinary transactions made by regular Americans all the time.
In effect, Democrats want to let the IRS systematically snoop through normal families' checking accounts, and as though they were all potential financial criminals until proven otherwise.
The government already has special authority to demand information on transactions over $10,000, but this would drastically decrease that number.
If American families are sending or receiving $600 from their checking account, Democrats want the IRS to snoop through it.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen argues the proposal has been mischaracterized.
The proposal involves no reporting of individual transactions of any individual.
Yellen told CBS the goal is to hold billionaires accountable.
The big picture is that we have a tax gap that over the next decade is estimated at $7 trillion, namely a shortfall in the amount that IRS is collecting due to a failure of individuals to report the income that they've earned.
Iowa Congresswoman Ashley Hinson is leading the charge to block the effort.
The government doesn't need to know every time you're going to Costco and stocking up on diapers and groceries, and I think it's just an incredible invasion of big government, and so our bill is designed to fight back against that.
If approved, banks will be required to provide the IRS with the total amount flowing in and out of flagged accounts each year. Now, many financial institutions are saying that all of this could cause their costs to go up, which the consumers would eventually feel. John, Jenna.
Abigail Robertson reporting for us. Thank you. And joining us now is Norbert Michel, Director for the Center of Monetary and Financial Alternatives at the Cato Institute. Norbert, welcome. Great to have you. So let's start there. What do you think about this proposed $600 reporting requirement?
Well, it would be funny if it was a joke, but it's not a joke. The first thing is that this tax gap concept, this is not new. This idea that somehow the IRS knows they should be taking in X amount of money in taxes, but they're only getting much less. That's been going on. They've been talking about that for well over 30 or 40 years. And the truth is, if you know that it's billionaires that are cheating on their taxes, well, you know exactly who those people are. There aren't that many billionaires in the U.S. or anywhere relative to everybody else. So it's very easy to go after exactly who you say is not paying their taxes.
Norbert,
there's no
Treasury
need
Secretary,
to collect everybody's bank
bank
account information.
So along those lines, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says it is not about peeking into Americans' pocketbooks, but cracking down on wealthy tax cheats, which you mentioned they should know who those are. Is there a more effective way to recoup those that lost revenue in taxes?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to concede that it exists, though. But I mean, and first of all, let me just throw in that what she's saying is nonsense. What she's saying doesn't add up. You're literally going to have the IRS take a giant data file from all these different banks. This is very much like the anti-money laundering reports. As it is, banks file millions and millions of reports every year on multiple transactions, even for people who have done absolutely nothing wrong. So I'm actually kind of a little bit surprised that the banks are pushing back so forcefully on this, because they're perfectly fine with doing all the anti-money laundering stuff that they do, even though it's quite similar. But it's very easy. The IRS has everybody's income information. They know who makes $1 billion a year. They know who the wealthiest individuals are in the nation. If those people are, in fact, cheating on their taxes, well, there's a process for dealing with that. And this is not necessary. And I guarantee you that if they audit a billionaire or anybody else and they have reasonable suspicion that you are committing fraudulent tax return or submitting fraudulent tax returns, they can get your bank account information. They can get everything. They can seize your assets. There's no need to do this.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said that $600 figure is up for negotiation. Norbert, do you think there is a figure that would be more fair?
No. The concept is completely misguided.
All right, well, we will leave it there. Norbert Michel with the Cato Institute. It's great to have you on this evening to get your insights. Thank you.
Thanks, Norbert.
Thank you. Thank you.
Another heated school board meeting in Northern Virginia. The shocking allegations that are leading some parents to call for a superintendent to resign. Next.
Welcome back. Outraged parents are blaming a suburban D.C. school district's transgender bathroom policy for claims of sexual assault against children. That led to another tense school board meeting Tuesday night in Loudoun County, Virginia. According to the Daily Wire, Scott Smith says his daughter was assaulted at a bathroom in Stonebridge High School last May. When he went before the board to share what he says happened and to protest the policy he says factored into the attack, he was arrested and later found guilty of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Following the Daily Wire story, more than 60 parents attended last night's board meeting demanding the superintendent resign. Well, joining us now is Tony Perkins with the Family Research Council. Tony, welcome back to Faith Nation. You wrote an article about this called "A School Horror Story That Did Not Fit the Narrative." Tony, can you explain what you meant by that?
Certainly. First off, Loudoun County is Exhibit A in what is wrong with our public schools, where the welfare, the safety of children being pushed to the back of the bus. So wokeism, this liberal ideology, and this radical sexual policy can be pushed onto our schools. What we had here is that Scott's daughter was sexually assaulted in a bathroom based upon the school's bathroom policy. It was a male wearing a dress. He obviously was upset about that. He was at a school board meeting in June, and this assault took place in May. The superintendent denied, when the bathroom policy was being considered, that no assaults had occurred. And of course, Scott was upset about this, wanted to speak out. That's when he was arrested. But John, what's so outrageous about this is that the National School Boards Association that wrote the letter just a week and a half ago to President Biden asking the Department of Justice to get involved in these school board meetings cited that case as their evidence that, quote unquote, domestic terrorism is taking place in these school board meetings.
According to school policy, Tony, Loudoun County students are allowed to use their chosen name and gender to determine which bathroom they'll use. Some parents say that's what led to these allegations of sexual abuse. What do you say to that?
Well, clearly the policies that they're adopting on this, I mean, look, this is insanity that we're allowing boys that have all of their parts as boys to go in girls' restrooms. That's what leads to assault. I mean, it doesn't take, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure this one out. This is surrendering what is common sense to allow the left to push this agenda that sexualizes our children and jeopardizes their well-being and their safety, all to appease the left. The superintendent, the documents that have been released so far make it very clear the school was aware of this assault, but yet denied it in this school board meeting. Something needs to happen here.
Tony, along those lines, parents are calling for the superintendent to resign, claiming that the district covered up the allegations of sexual assault. There are 2 alleged cases. Given what happened to the father, Scott Smith, do you see that potentially happening?
Well, the school board released a statement just a little bit ago saying they were unaware of this, but certainly they should take action on the superintendent if they were not aware of this. But keep this in mind. This is just, as I said, Exhibit A. This is not the only place this is occurring. This is occurring all across America in public schools that have these ludicrous policies, asinine policies that deny reality in order to appease the left. It's time that parents continue, despite what the Biden administration might suggest, that they're equivalent to domestic terrorists by signing on to the National School Board Association's letter. But what they need to do is continue to show up and demand that these schools protect their children.
All right, Tony Perkins with the Family Research Council. Tony, great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
A new warning from Israel's foreign minister, why he's telling the Biden administration to tread with caution when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. Iran becoming a nuclear state is a problem for Israel. That's been the message from Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid during his trip to Washington this week. Today, he brought that concern to Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Every delay in the negotiations brings Iran closer to a nuclear bomb. The Iranians are clearly dragging their heels, trying to cheat the world, to continue to enrich uranium, to develop their ballistic missile program. If a terror regime is going to acquire a nuclear weapon, we must act. We must make clear that the civilized world won't allow it.
Since the Biden administration took office, Israel and the U.S. have disagreed over the U.S. reinstating nuclear negotiations with Iran. But Lapid says despite the disagreements, Israel's security is something both nations view as a top priority. While in Washington, Lapid and his counterparts also discussed programs made since the signing of the Abraham Accords last year.
And for more now, we turn to Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Chris, always great to see you. Can you tell us in what ways the Abraham Accords have reshaped the Middle East since the historic pact was signed last summer?
Well, John, it really has changed the whole Middle East. I would say one thing that is done is made these historic alliances between many of these Sunni Arab nations and Israel public. Actually, some of these alliances have been under the radar for several years, but once they codified them last year in the Abraham Accords, it really has changed the alliances here. Many of these alliances are against the common enemy, that would be Iran. But on the other hand, it really has changed trade, it has changed tourism and people-to-people relationships between Israel and many of these Sunni Arab nations. I was at a meeting just yesterday, John, about the Knesset Abraham Accords caucus. They're trying to institutionalize, trying to move these forward. I met a Bahraini yesterday, and I was asking him, it was first time in Israel. He's saying Israelis are great people. He loves to work with them. Just a sign of how things are changing here in the Middle East.
Chris, does the Biden administration show any interest in furthering the accords? Has there been any progress since President Biden took office?
John, I'd say yes and no. I mean, we had progress just about a week ago. Sudan said that it was going to seize assets of Hamas. Hamas and Sudan had been sort of working together and funneling funds to the terror group in the Gaza Strip. They have been shut off right now. Sudan's going to be taken off the terror group of states. So that's one thing, sign of progress. Yesterday at that meeting I was telling you about, the charged affairs here at the U.S. Embassy, he said the Biden administration is going to keep the momentum going with the Abraham Accords. However, John, I don't think it's the kind of motivation, the kind of tailwind, as it were, that you would find with the Trump administration. So, yes, there is some progress, but I don't think the same kind of progress that you'd see.
Chris, the Israeli delegation that's here in the United States keeps bringing up Iran during their meetings. It exposes a source of tension between Israel and the United States. How are the revived nuclear negotiations with Tehran viewed by the public in Israel?
I think viewed by the public and Israeli leaders, you could go back to the former government with Benjamin Netanyahu, the current government with Naftali Bennett, and I know Yair Lapid is there in Washington now. Across the board, they see the nuclear deal as something that would endanger Israel. They feel it leads a path for a nuclear, not a nuclear device, a nuclear arsenal for the Islamic Republic. And they see as an existential threat. That's why many leaders, John, here have been saying that Israel will go it alone if they have to. In other words, they're not going to allow the United States to have a veto over Israel attacking nuclear facilities throughout Iran if they have to do that. It's a last resort, but it's something that Israel feels like they need to do it for their own survival. So the United States is not going to have a veto over this existential threat that's been hanging over Israel for many, many years.
Many years indeed. Chris, as you well know, last month, progressive lawmakers here in the United States House of Representatives stripped Iron Dome funding from a spending measure. Later, it ultimately won approval in another vote. But obviously, Chris, the move made a statement. How important, can you remind us how important America's military and financial support is to Israel's defensive measures?
Well, it's vital, John. I mean, it's about $3 billion a year that they get in aid. I know there was something signed with the Obama administration over 10 years, I think $30 billion of aid. But it's a two-way street. You know, a lot of people over here would like to remind Americans that technology goes both ways. And actually, the United States actually gets a lot of advantages by some of the technology and the weapon systems that come over here to Israel. That includes the Iron Dome, actually. Ironically, some of that technology is a joint venture with Israel and the United States. But certainly the kind of funds and the technology, F-35 fighters, for example, things like that, is something that Israel really needs for its defense. It's a tough neighborhood over here. The main threat, as we talked about, is Iran. So they need the U.S., but I think the U.S. also needs Israel. It's a cooperative venture, and they really need a strong Israel here in the Middle East. It really does protect the United States as well. And especially now after the U.S. is pulling out of Afghanistan, it really does have a domino effect and it threatens Israel. We talked just a few hours ago with former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and he was adamant in his need that the United States needs, especially now after Afghanistan, stand with the Jewish state.
All right, CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Chris, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you, John.
Finally tonight, after years spent sailing among the stars on TV and the big screen, actor William Shatner has finally gotten a real-life glimpse of the world beyond Earth's atmosphere.
Now the man who immortalized Star Trek's Captain Kirk is making history in the process. At 90, Shatner has become the oldest person ever to blast off into space. For about 10 minutes today, he joined 3 passengers on Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin rocket, taking in an interstellar view of the Earth.
I don't know. I can't even begin to express what I would love to do is to communicate as much as possible.
Hey.
The jeopardy, the moment you see how the vulnerability of everything, it's so small. This air, which is keeping us alive, is thinner than your skin.
Even with the fame and fortune, Shatner says today's space flight was the most profound experience of his life. And Jenna, I have to admit, good for him as a former Trekkie, big fan.
You know, he looks good. I wouldn't say 90. Wow.
I would agree. Thanks for watching.